You are 5 years old when a woman comes to your house and your parents say yes. You do not understand what they have agreed to. You will not understand what they have agreed to for years. By the time you do, the debt has already been building for a decade. Everything you have eaten, worn, and learned since that day belongs to someone else. Your life as a geisha is not the life that Memoirs of a Geisha showed you. It is not the life of graceful performances and wealthy patrons choosing you from across a room. It is a life of debt, discipline, and a beauty system that was quietly poisoning you. It is a life where leaving required weeks of written apology and a debt you may never fully repay. It is also a life of genuine artistry, real skill, and a female world that ran entirely on its own terms. Both things are true and neither one cancels the other out. This is what your life as a geisha actually looked like. The okiya is the geisha house, and it is where your life begins. You arrived there as young as 5 years old in the historical tradition. Your family received a payment and you received a future that was not yours to choose. From the moment you walked through the door, the house began keeping a record. Every meal you ate was logged and added to your total. Every lesson you received was recorded and priced accordingly. Every kimono, every instrument, every hairpiece, every cosmetic was logged. All of it went onto a debt that you would spend years working to repay. You did not begin earning money immediately. First, you worked as a servant inside the okiya, cleaning, running errands, assisting senior women. This period was called shikomi, and it lasted until the house decided you were ready to begin training. The training that followed was the most demanding education most of these girls had ever encountered. You learned traditional Japanese dance, music, and the shamisen. You learned the precise art of tea ceremony, flower arranging, and formal conversation. You learned how to enter a room, how to pour a drink, and how to make a powerful man feel interesting. You learned all of this while your debt continued to accumulate. The okiya paid for your training and added every cost to the total you owed. A girl who had been in the system for 10 years before earning her first independent income was not unusual. The debt was not designed as a punishment for anything you had done. It was the architecture of the system. It kept you inside the okiya far more effectively than any locked door ever could. The house mother was called oka-san, meaning mother in Japanese. She was rarely your mother, and the relationship was rarely maternal in the way the word suggests. She was the person who tracked your debt, scheduled your appearances, and determined your future. She was also the person who decided whether you stayed or whether you left. Leaving without her permission was not straightforward. Girls who ran away in the middle of the night were tracked down and brought back. Former apprentice Kiritaka described the suffocating pressure of trying to leave. She had attempted to escape and was quickly found by her oka-san and returned. To officially quit the system required weeks of formal written apology to everyone involved. Letters to the oka-san, to senior geisha, to patrons, to the association that governed the district. One former apprentice said that if she had stayed, she believed she would have killed herself. That was the word she used, and she had lived it firsthand. The appearance of a geisha was not natural, and it was not free. It was constructed daily through a process that took hours and caused lasting physical damage. The white face makeup that defines the geisha image is called oshiroi. For roughly 2 centuries, the compound used to make oshiroi contained lead. The women who wore it every day did not know this. They applied it to their faces and necks at every performance across years and decades of their careers. The slow accumulation of lead entered their skin and their bloodstream over time. It caused skin deterioration, neurological damage, and shortened the lives of women who wore it. The fact that the white makeup was poisonous was not officially recognized until the Meiji era. By then, generations of geisha had been applying it without understanding what it was doing to them. The beauty standard that defined their profession was quietly killing the women who maintained it. The hairstyle caused its own separate and permanent damage. The traditional Nihongami style required hair to be pulled tightly, set with wax, and held in fixed position. The style was maintained for days at a time without being taken down. The sustained tension on the scalp caused a condition called traction alopecia. Traction alopecia is permanent hair loss caused by repeated pulling on the hair follicle. Senior geisha developed significant baldness along the hairline and crown of the head. The use of wigs eventually became standard precisely because the traditional style destroyed the hair it required. The appearance that defined geisha to the outside world was built on lead and sustained tension. The women who maintained it paid for it with their health across years and decades of performance. None of this appears in the popular image of the geisha as a figure of serene beauty. The popular image was the surface of the performance only. What it cost was kept inside the okiya. Mineko Iwasaki was born in 1949 and left home at the age of 5 to enter the Iwasaki Okiya in Kyoto. She became the most celebrated geisha in Japan and retired suddenly at the age of 29. In the 1990s, an American author named Arthur Golden was researching a novel about geisha life. He interviewed Mineko Iwasaki, and she agreed on the condition that she remain anonymous. Golden published Memoirs of a Geisha in 1997 and named her as a source. The book depicted geisha in ways that the geisha community of Kyoto found deeply inaccurate and offensive. Mineko Iwasaki received death threats after the book was published. She later sued Arthur Golden for breach of confidentiality, and they settled out of court. She then wrote her own autobiography to correct what the novel had portrayed. The woman whose life inspired the most famous Western account of geisha spent years under threat for having spoken. The mizuwage was the transition ceremony that marked a maiko's rise from apprentice to full geisha. Historically, the ceremony involved wealthy patrons bidding for the right to take the maiko's virginity. The girl had no say in who won the bidding. The money from the mizuwage went entirely to the okiya to reduce the girl's outstanding debt. She received none of the money from her own mizuwage. Mineko Iwasaki's mizuwage reportedly set a record at the time. The amount bid was 100 million yen. At current exchange rates, that is approximately $850,000. The practice was technically outlawed under Japan's prostitution prevention legislation in the 1950s. Former geisha Sayo Masuda described in her 1957 autobiography being sold multiple times by her okiya. Each time the okiya told the patron she had not yet lost her virginity. Each time the transaction was explicitly sexual and the okiya took the payment. A professor at Oberlin University who studies geisha described the arrangement directly. She said that because the girls had no say in the matter, you could call it sex slavery in that regard. That assessment came from an academic who spent years researching the system from the inside. Leaving the geisha world required one of three things. You could pay off your debt entirely, which took years of work and careful management. You could find a dana, a wealthy patron who paid off your remaining debt in exchange for exclusivity. Or you could marry, which meant immediate retirement and leaving the profession forever. Geisha could not be married and remain in practice. Marriage was an exit and not a continuation of the career. The dana system was common and the relationship was complicated. A dana who paid off your debt owned a claim on your time and your company. The nature of that claim varied and was not always clearly defined. Some of these relationships involved companionship only and nothing further. Others involved sexual expectations that were never formally stated but were understood by everyone involved. The system was designed to make the terms vague enough to avoid legal classification. After Japan's prostitution prevention law passed in 1956, the okiya became careful about documentation. They kept detailed financial records specifically to protect themselves from charges of debt bondage. The old system of forced debt is illegal, an association administrator noted at the time. The okiya therefore maintained careful and detailed records of every monetary transaction. The records existed to protect the house and not the geisha who lived in it. What the geisha world actually was is harder to define than either its defenders or its critics suggest. It was an industry run entirely by women in a society that gave women almost no formal power. The okasan, the senior geisha, and the association administrators were all women. Men attended the performances, but they did not run the houses. It was a system that exploited girls through debt and limited their choices through social obligation. It was also a system that produced some of the most skilled traditional artists in Japanese history. It trained women in disciplines that took decades to master and preserved arts that might otherwise have disappeared. Mineko Iwasaki performed for Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Charles. She found the Queen frosty and rude. She told Prince Charles he could keep the fan he had signed because she did not want it anymore. She was the most celebrated geisha in Japan, and she retired at 29 on her own terms. She left the profession because she chose to leave it. she was one of the very few who could. The debt, the training, the white makeup, the hairstyle, the misuage, the Dana system. All of it was the price of an artistry that the outside world saw only as performance. You were 5 years old when it began. You spent the next 2 decades learning whether it was worth it.